All this stuff is run by the very same nasty people. I mean, the latest James Bond movie, they admitted, was advised by MI6. And the Quantum Group is the name of George Soros' fund. And the bad guy who runs Spectre is the head of the Quantum Group. He's the guy that tried to crash the British pound. Even intelligence agencies are telling you who runs Spectre. So understand, Ian Fleming was MI6. This is art imitating life, not the other way around. And I had to say, one person is like a top general of this globalist crime syndicate. It's a Soros. But there's others even worse than him. And these are people that have bad will towards the West. I'm going to shut up now for Matt Bracken because I've been jumping in a lot. He's just laying out so much knowledge. Start wherever you want. Go wherever you want. Former Navy SEAL, involved in a lot of clandestine operations all over the world. You can find out more at enemiesforeignanddomestic.com. Comes highly recommended, and I can tell why now because I was unaware of this guy. There's so many great patriots out there. I know the patriots know who he is. I just get so busy covering news. And then, Matt, lay out this Tet Offensive, how you think we stop it. You've got the floor, my friend.
I don't think we stop it. I think that the forces are in motion, are like deep sea tsunamis. The earthquake's already happened, and the waves are moving across the ocean. There's going to be a convergence. What people tend to do is look at each potential calamity in isolation and say, well, that's survivable. You know, if just a hurricane just hit New Orleans, that's survivable. But if you get, 100 Katrinas that happen at the same time, the system is shocked. It goes into shock. Can't move. It can't save itself. Like somebody being shot once in the foot compared to being shot 20 times at once. We're going to have an overload to the system. Now, the plan might be for this Marxist takedown. I look at it like a pyramid, and you have at the very top some very few very evil people. And I think that you could almost, depending on your religious persuasions, you could call them almost like a satanic influence or force. Below that, you have people that are also evil, but they really believe in communist revolution and that we're going to attain it. But we're not going to attain a communist revolution. We're armed to the teeth in this country. But we will have a massive civil war. But the civil war won't be a geographic north-south civil war. It's going to be a society tearing into itself civil war, kind of in the way of Bosnia, where people all speak the same language, but they have different factions. In this country, there will be such a strong racial element that it's going to get out of control in a very ugly way. And the problem is that there's no way to recoup the civilization. It's a very precious bubble that we're floating in, and we take it for granted. But our modern civilization is much more dangerous to ourselves than previous civilizations because, for example, calamities that happened to Europe, Black Death, 30 years of war, Cromwell in Ireland, events that killed a third of a population, say, in a generation. You could still just grow food on your own acre and survive. If you weren't, our food, we don't grow it anymore. Our food comes from thousands of miles away. We all now are living in the equivalent of a glass bubble on Mars. And we don't see the glass bubble. We just think how pretty outer space is. But electricity has become our oxygen. And we're living under this false artificial glass bubble. It's such a complex system now. It has to run perfectly like a Swiss watch.
I got to interrupt. I think I found my new guru. Man, you see it exactly like I do because that's how it is. If we have a collapse event, it will take hundreds of years to try to even get back, but the reactors will start melting down within a matter of months. I mean, oh my God. Sorry, go ahead.
It might be the South. It might be like Argentina. You'll have to get to, the North could be a nuclear wasteland, depending on, I can't profess any great knowledge about nuclear plant safety. But if the economy locks up, if the grid goes down, something people need to understand, there are three parallel systems, like our nervous system, muscular system, bone structure. We have a financial system, an electrical grid, and a computer network system. If any one of those three is attacked really in depth, recurring attacks, then all three collapse and our society collapses. You cannot, if the financial system collapses, people can't get money out of the ATM, they loot the stores, game over. If the computer system collapses, the grid runs out of control, pipelines go open haywire all over the collapse, all game over. So any of those three collapse, financial, global computer network, it's mostly Cisco hardware running over fiber optical cables, and the electrical grid, which we know that that Metcalf station attack out in California a year ago, looking at it as a spec ops officer, that was a proof of concept test. That was a very professional thing. They had gone through an underground, cut optical trunks, did things so that there would be no rapid response, fired at these giant transformers, shut the thing down. That to me was somebody showing somebody else that if we do this 20 times, we take down America.
Proof of concept. Proof
of concept. And increase my budget, because if I have 20 teams, if you budget me for 20 teams, the people I would be looking at would be foreign students. That's the way that you can cycle commandos into a country. They can come in, for example, for 1 year of being a student, and they can recon their whole area. They can come in another year as a student in another college, and at the last minute be organized into a cell, take out these stations. For example, I just say, look, if Iran, just to pick on Iran here, if they're going to spend billions of dollars on a nuclear program, why wouldn't they spend a few million on a cheap kill grid takedown scenario just using commandos disguised as students? It's what we would do if we were smart and had that mindset. KGB used to plan that kind of thing. But how can we assume that our grid is not going to be collapsed at some point, especially with these Marxists trying to do the big takedown between the conventions and the inauguration? Is a time of maximum danger. I think of it as 1917 in Russia or 1789 in France.
And again, they want it to collapse, so they take over.
But they can't take over. This is the thing. A plan, this is what I say a lot, a plan to ride a tiger is not the same as riding a tiger.
Sure, that's why when Mao took over in China, 40, 50 million people died in the first round.
And communism still didn't work, but it can wreck a society. And what I'm afraid is we're going to have in this country a wrecked society. Now, we have to hold on to the Bill of Rights no matter who's put on the Supreme Court. They can say the moon is made out of green cheese, and that anybody that says they're a giraffe, you have to call them a giraffe. It won't make it reality. They can't take away our First or Second Amendment rights. If they try to, I don't care. If they stack the deck with communists on the Supreme Court.
We have to defend every liberty at point blank range and promote it everywhere.
Because we may not have this means of communication. We could have our internet taken away. I wrote the short story. You can just look at these things on the internet called What I Saw at the Coup, where as the backdrop is a missile war in the Middle East that takes down our grid temporarily and our internet for longer. And during that period, troublemakers like us are quietly taken off the stage left because there's no way for anybody to know what's happening to anybody for that month. And then when the internet comes back on, it comes back on in a much more controlled way.
And how this is going to go is they've already got the commissars and the UN Strong Cities Initiative in every major city, quote, advising the police. And so if the police go along with it, then the Justice Department doesn't come in and harass them and take over. And so they're already setting up these contacts during a collapse to have the commissars order the police and local security services led by federal leaders to go out and round up the patriots. The police and others just have to not follow those orders at the point that, plus, you really want that job trying to go round up all the veterans?
That's the plan to ride the tiger. It's not the same as riding the tiger. In my first novel, the guys that actually shoot into the stadium on opening day of that Washington FedEx football field, from a mile away, somebody rainbow arcs in some SKS rounds, causing a panic stampede. Now, these are just two ATF, mid-level executives that want to see the ATF's budget increase because it'll increase their power and prestige. They know that they're not going to wind up with America being disarmed. They know it'll lead to a civil war. They know people won't turn in their semi-automatic weapons. But they're happy to start a civil war if they're in charge of one of the factions that's going to be very powerful.
Crisis is our brand.
Right. And we're going to see events spin completely out of control, particularly if, as I said, the financial system, you look at Deutsche Bank and situations in Europe that are more dire even than with our Fed and our quantitative easing. Europe is in just as much of thin ice financially. Imagine when this TET breaks out, nobody will be going to work for months. So what happens to the economy? The metros are closed. Every time a metro runs again, somebody jumps out and blows one up.
Sure.
No more metros. That's how they get to work.
And there's also going to be a move to round up all the Muslims in Europe and here because they're sleeper cells. You'll almost have to. But under the cover of that, then they'll have the precedent to round up everybody they want. And you can see that as the kind of right-wing response being sold by former CIA directors and others. That's another program they've got cooking. So both the right-wing and left-wing elements of the power structure want the crisis because they all think they're going to battle each other inside the control grid for who gets control of the crisis when they're unleashing something, as you've said properly, that is uncontrollable and will bring in meltdown worldwide that's probably not survivable. We have to somehow communicate with these different establishment groups and say, listen, your guy upstairs is probably Satan himself. Stop following these orders, you lunatics.
I don't think that it can be turned off. I don't think that if George Soros had a conversion on the road to Damascus, if George Soros turned into George Washington tomorrow and he said, stop, everybody, turn around. There's too much momentum. It's now like giant boulders coming down the hill.
I agree with you, unfortunately. I agree with you.
These forces.
I agree with you, but
we need to prepare for a grid down scenario in the next year because we're not going to have a Russian revolution, French revolution through Washington, D.C., and the power stays on. I promise you that in this chaos, even if engineers can't get to work because it's too dangerous, because there's just people.
Venezuela now doesn't have power, basically no refrigeration. All these other countries can't do it. Under communism and command and control, you don't get electricity or medicine, folks.
But it's going to probably collapse before they get anywhere near establishing a communist control.
I understand, yes.
Because we'll have a civil war like the Finns. People forget there was a war called the Winter War where little Finland actually beat the Soviet Union that rolled in thinking.
There's a book on that, isn't it? Total Resistance?
Yeah, and they tangled with like a Switzerland. They walked right into they sent a bunch of unmotivated reservists, conscripts, into a country like Switzerland with a William Tell type of, Marxist,
Patriot
Marksman mentality, marksmanship culture.
Isn't William Tell the archetype of the rebel against tyranny, the true story of the guy that took out all those people because they hurt his kids?
That's right, and that's right. He was Charles Bronson, so to speak. Well, there's millions of Charles Bronsons in this country, and I have to tell you, some of the most dangerous Charles Bronsons I know are older than me, and they might have a bad cough or they can't ride their motorcycle anymore. But they're thinking, when this happens, I'm not just going to go quietly. I'm going to make it.
I don't think all the leftists that can barely wipe their noses realize that they're about to stick their hand down a badger hole.
No, that's right. And forget about AR-15s. The most common type of rifle is just the generic bolt-action deer rifle that can hit and kill a 200-pound mammal at 400 yards.
Remington 700.
Millions.
I've shot deer at 1,000 yards with a Remington 700.
And the most dangerous order of battle will be what I call the militia of one, where just one guy doesn't tell anybody, not even his wife maybe. He just goes out, he goes to town with the rifle, he takes one shot, and that's it. I mean, look at the DC sniper situation. They got it totally wrong. They got the acoustics wrong.
Stay there, Matt Bracken. Stay there. We're going to talk about this. This is so important. Wow. We got 5 minutes here and 5 minutes the next segment. Then Roger Stone, the consummate Trump insider, is going to give us all the intel on what's coming up, what's developed, of the big victories last night. The globalists are financing revolution all over the world. They're against the nation state. They play the countries off against each other. That's like a James Bond movie. Well, that's because that's how it really works. And the worst element is the Anglo-American establishment. That's what they call themselves. Nothing to do with being Anglo, but it's people that run England and the United States and a few other countries. It's the dominant force because it had the wealthiest, most open free market system to milk. And it is just running around all over the world, allied with radical Islam. And we have to get that narrative out of it's game over. I want to invite Matt Bracken, who I got to say I'm extremely impressed with. I read some of his essays, thought they were excellent. But I tell you, I absolutely click with what he's saying. Doesn't mean I agree with him. I totally agree with him. But it's not like I like him because I agree. It's because I know it's accurate. And everything he's saying, the way it pieces together, is exactly basically the way I've been seeing it. A lot of my other sources have been seeing it. And what's scary is it's like there's no